All right. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Cabin Fever Faith. Yeah, I'm in the woods trying to take out some buckthorn in our property. So I'm entitling this one, Beware of the Buckthorn. So I talk about that a little bit. You know, buckthorn is very biblical, if you don't know that already. I think it was in Judges in chapter 9. Abimelech, or the Israelites, the northern kingdom, wanted a king to rule them rather than God to rule them in appointing judges. And so they wanted Abimelech, a guy by the name of Abimelech, to rule over them. But Jotham, who happens to be part of that family, knew how evil Abimelech really was. And so he gives them the parable of the buckthorn. And it goes something like this. You know, the cedars of Lebanon wanted a tree to rule over them. Now, cedars of Lebanon are a lot like our sequoia trees or redwood forests, beautiful and majestic, and that was Israel. But they wanted a tree to rule over them. And so they said to the olive tree, why don't you rule over us? And the olive tree said, why should I rule over you and give up my precious oil? So he said, no. So then they asked, well, how about the fig tree? Fig tree, you rule over us. And the fig tree said, no, I don't want to give up my fruit. Then they asked the vine, the grapevine, and the vine said, well, I don't want to give up my wine in order to rule over you. And so they settled on the buckthorn. And the buckthorn said, if you want me to rule over you, then may fire be upon those who oppose me. Well, that buckthorn was Abimelech, all right? Now, let me tell you a little bit about buckthorn. You know, buckthorn was introduced in this country as a sort of ornamental bush, and people thought it was a kind of a nice bush for yards and, you know, property lines and so forth. But what happened? It took over. And in fact, it's an invasive species now. It comes into forests and woods. It doesn't let the understory to grow good trees like oaks and aspen and other trees that help wildlife. It takes over and it's good for nothing. It doesn't feed any tree. You know, I know they call it buckthorn because it's so thick and brambly, but the deer don't feed on it. Maybe domestic goats would eat it, but it does nothing but cover the canopy. It's shade tolerant, so it spreads like wildfire. Birds eat its seeds and they spread it, and it goes like crazy, but it takes over everything. And that was Abimelech. As soon as Abimelech was elected king or ruler over Israel, what did he do? The first thing he did was kill over 70 of his relatives. Brothers, sisters, his mother, everybody, and so there would be no competition. He ruled with an iron fist, and because he was a spoiled brat, an evil man who ruled only for himself. And the people, it was too late, you know, by the time the people realized it. And Jotham was smart enough, even though he was a relative of Abimelech, to escape death. And eventually, after 3 years, he was able to convince the Israelites in the northern kingdom to cast out Abimelech because of his evil deeds. He was an evil king. So, and he was like the buckthorn, right? Once you let it loose, it spreads all over. And you know, that's how evil works. You know, evil always appears good on the surface, but beneath it takes over and rules by oppression and depression and even possession for some people, you might say. And so the question is, what's the buckthorn in your life that you need to be cautious of, aware of, or to use your common sense to kind of allow God to lead you and not give in to things that could ultimately destroy you, and like the buckthorn does. So, yeah, I've been clearing out some of our property here and back home. I got most of the buckthorn. It's not something you're going to completely get rid of, but what you can do is kind of keep it under control, just like evil in the world. Can't get rid of it until the end of time, but at least we can keep it under wraps and just be aware of it. And so I'm here in one of our properties, just killed a buckthorn. And the thing about buckthorn, you can't just cut it. You have to use a spray. You notice I sprayed that root with Tordon. or I think even Roundup might work, because otherwise it just resprouts and it spreads even more. And you can always tell buckthorn. November is a good time to take out buckthorn because it's the last bush to lose its leaves. And let me grab just a leaf here and I'll show you. See here. Tangled mess. There we go. So if you're ever in the wilderness and you see, these green leaves in November, even after frost, that's buckthorn. And if at all possible, try to get rid of it because it's going to take over and ruin your hunting property or your land. It doesn't even turn a beautiful color in fall. It's just, I don't know. Keep it in somebody's, yard, but not in the wilderness. So, yeah, it's a challenge. And anybody who does any managing for their woods, their forests, know what buckthorn's all about. And it's a tough one to get rid of. Like all invasive species, once it gets hold, it's hard to get rid of. And evil's like that once it takes hold of us. So we need to always be aware and cautious as well. So what's the buckthorn in your life? Always be aware. And that's the first step in conquering evil in life. And of course, Jesus Christ conquered all things. So, yeah. So the Israelites eventually survived Abimelech, the evil king, with Jotham's help, and they're able to continue on. So anyway, God bless you. Yeah, stay out of the buckthorn, and let's keep praying and doing good, and yeah, ridding evil out of our lives and really out of the life of our society and communities and world. So God bless.